Ashfall wasn't on any map I owned. It was one of those places you found by accident, a cluster of slate-roofed cottages nestled in a valley so deep, the sun only truly graced it for a few hours a day. I'd been driving aimlessly, escaping a life I no longer recognized when a hand-painted sign, barely legible, pointed down a gravel track towards Ashfall, handwovens and sustenance. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, tugged me in. The air, even in late summer, held a damp, earthy chill, a smell of wet stone and something else, something subtly metallic, like old pennies. The villagers were quiet, almost unnaturally so. They watched me with an unnerving politeness, their eyes following my movements as I parked my beat-up sedan. The first thing I noticed, truly noticed, was the clothing. Everyone, without exception, wore garments woven from a dark, coarse fabric, a deep charcoal grey that seemed to absorb the scant light. It was all practical, simple, but it was uniform. Too uniform. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just a remote community with traditional ways. I found the inn, a squat, solid building with a low doorway. Inside, the main room was warm, smelling of wood smoke and a faint, sweet, cloying aroma I couldn't place. An elderly woman, her face a roadmap of fine wrinkles, emerged from behind a counter. Her name was Elara. She offered me a room, her voice a dry whisper, and a meal of thick stew and dark bread. As I ate, I noticed the same dark cloth everywhere, tablecloths, curtains, even a shawl draped over the back of a chair. It felt less like a preference and more like a rule. I tried to make conversation, asking about the village, its history. Ilara's answers were short, almost evasive. "We keep to ourselves," she said, her eyes, the color of wet slate, fixed on mine. "We always have." She then pointed to a small, intricate tapestry hanging on the wall beside the hearth, depicting a stylized tree with deep roots. "It protects us," she whispered, almost to herself. "Keeps us whole." The next morning, I wandered the village, my steps echoing a little too loudly. Everyone was busy, but no one seemed to make any noise. Women spun yarn from large, dark fleeces, men tilled small plots of land, children played with carved wooden toys, all in near silence. I saw no modern conveniences, no electricity lines, no vehicles beyond a few ancient carts. It was like stepping back in time. I stopped by a small cottage with a loom visible through the open door. A young woman, perhaps my age, was working swiftly, her shuttle a blur. She wore the same dark cloth, but hers had an almost luminous quality, a richness that hinted at something more than simple wool. I ventured a greeting. She started, her head snapping up, her eyes wide, like a deer caught in a lamp's beam. She didn't speak, but her hands, though calloused, were beautiful, slender, and incredibly quick. There was a peculiar mark on her wrist, a faint, almost invisible tracing of something like a leaf or a branch woven into the skin itself. Later that day, feeling an increasing unease, I went to the small, dusty general store. The shelves held preserves, dried herbs, and more bolts of that dark fabric. The storekeeper, a stoic man with a long beard, nodded curtly when I asked about the peculiar cloth. "Ashfall weave," he rumbled, his voice gravelly. "Finest in the land. Keeps the cold out. Keeps other things out too." I bought some dried fruit and a small, intricately carved wooden bird. As he wrapped it, my gaze snagged on a display of small, smooth stones, each one etched with a tiny, delicate pattern, the same leaf-like design I'd seen on the young weaver's wrist. "What are these for?" I asked, pointing. The man's eyes flickered, a strange, almost fearful light in them. "For the marking," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Everyone gets one, to show where they belong, to show they are protected." He wouldn't elaborate, just shook his head and gestured for my payment. The phrase "to show they are protected" chilled me more than any open threat. That night, the strange, cloying sweetness in the air seemed stronger. I lay in my inn room, trying to read, but my mind kept returning to the uniform clothing, the silent villagers, the leaf markings, and Ilara's cryptic words about protection. I heard no sounds from outside, no distant laughter, no dog barking, just the wind sighing through the valley. It felt less like peace and more like absence. I drifted off to sleep, only to be woken by a low, rhythmic thrumming sound, like a massive, ancient loom working in the distance. It was too deep for a hand loom, too consistent. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a vibration that pulsed through the floorboards and into my bones. I crept to the window, peering out into the moonless night. Nothing but shadows and the vague, looming shapes of the surrounding hills. But the thrumming continued, a deep, pervasive hum that suggested immense, tireless effort. It was unsettling, the sound of something vast and indifferent. I told myself it was just the wind, or perhaps some old mill, but my gut churned with a primal fear. The next morning, the thrumming was gone, leaving only the same profound quiet. Ilara served me breakfast, her eyes still watchful. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, a hint of something I couldn't decipher in her tone. I nodded, not wanting to betray my unease. I decided to leave that day. Ashfall was too strange, too wrong. As I packed my car, I saw the young weaver from yesterday walking towards the edge of the village, carrying a large, dark bundle. Her movements were stiff, almost puppet-like, and her head was bowed. She passed a small group of villagers, and they didn't acknowledge her, didn't even glance her way. It was as if she were invisible. I realized she looked thinner than before, her already delicate frame seeming to have shrunk, and the intricate marking on her wrist, while still there, appeared fainter, less distinct. A tremor of cold went through me. What was happening to her? I started my car, my mind racing, desperate to get away. But as I began to drive towards the gravel track leading out of the valley, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. Near the edge of the woods, where the young weaver had been headed, stood a massive, gnarled oak tree, and woven into its lowest branches, like some grotesque, living nest, was a tapestry of the same dark, coarse fabric. It was enormous, at least 10 feet tall and wide, impossibly intricate, and it seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. It wasn't just a tapestry, it was woven directly into the tree, integrated with the bark and leaves. And then I saw it, within the dark weave, almost invisible against the deep grey, was a face. A human face, distinct and unmistakable, eyes wide and staring, mouth slightly agape in a silent scream. It was the young weaver. Her face, her features, woven into the very fabric of the tree tapestry, and the faint, branch-like mark on her wrist, I now understood, was not a symbol, but a root, a living thread. I sat there, frozen, the engine idling, the implications crushing me. The thrumming from last night, not a loom, but the tree, weaving. The sweet, cloying smell, not perfume, but the slow, agonizing process of a human being consumed, transformed. The Ashfall weave wasn't just fabric, it was them. Their bodies, their lives, sacrificed to keep the village protected. The quiet was the quiet of those being prepared, the silence of a people who knew their fate and accepted it. The uniforms weren't just clothing. They were the first layer, the slow absorption. The markings, not a sign of belonging, but the initiation of the weave. The whole village was an intricate tapestry of fear and sacrifice, living on the threads of their own kind. I backed up slowly, turned the car, and sped away, not daring to look back. I drove until the engine gasped for fuel and I could no longer feel the distant, silent thrum of the valley. But I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that even now, somewhere deep inside me, a single, tiny thread had been pulled, the dark, sweet fiber beginning to take root. Thank you for listening. If this story found you in the dark, subscribe and turn on notifications. A new tale waits every night.